Chapter 8. The Secret of Parlaying Small Successes into Larger Gains. When Bette Nesmith, a single parent with a 9-year-old son, worked in a Dallas bank, she seemed rather average with no particular promise for big things. She was glad to have the secretarial job. $300 a month was very good for 1951, but she did have a problem: how to correct the errors she made with her new electric typewriter. Nesmith has been a freelance artist, and artists never correct by erasing. They simply paint over the error. So she concocted a fluid that she has used to paint over her typing errors. Before long, all the secretaries in the building were using what she then called mistake out. An office supply dealer encouraged her to manufacture the paint, but marketing agencies weren't impressed, and companies, among them IBM, turned her down cold. But the secretaries continued to like the product. So Nesmith's kitchen became her first manufacturing facility. Orders began to trickle in. She hired a college student to help sell the product, but it was not easy for two inexperienced saleswomen. People will never paint out their mistakes, a dealer would say. Records show that August 1959 to April 1960, the company's total income was $1,142.71, and its expenses were $1,217.35. "I don't know how I made it," Bette said. She worked part-time as a secretary, managing to buy groceries and save $200 to pay a chemist to develop a faster-drying formula. With the improved product, Nesmith began taking her little bottles around the country. She stopped in small towns and big cities. Upon arriving in a city, she wrote, "I'd get the phone book and I'd write down the names of dealers, and then I'd call them. We'd go to each office supply store and leave 12 bottles. Eventually, orders began to pour in, and the Liquid Paper Corporation began to fly." When she sold the company in 1979, the tiny white bottles were earning $3.5 million annually on sales of $38 million, and the Gillette Company paid $47.5 million for the firm. The most successful people are very often like Bette Nesmith. They lead rather ordinary lives until suddenly some small success occurs. Then, unlike the average person, they parlay that small achievement to larger gains. They have what one management consultant has called a repeater tendency. That is, once they find themselves succeeding, they set out to duplicate the accomplishment again in larger settings. The experts at motivation encourage this snowballing of success. They study their people, looking for the strengths others have overlooked. Then, when small achievements began to appear in the person's work, they know how to transform them into larger successes. The Jewish proverb is, "When luck enters, give him a seat." Rule number 7, then, for bringing out the best in people, is one that every leader has heard in seminars and books, yet one that is widely neglected: recognize and applaud achievement. The art of praise, what is known as positive reinforcement, is the current psychological jargon, is an essential art of an executive or a teacher to master. I discussed in Chapter 2 the importance of experiencing the best from people, but this rule is quite different. In the earlier section, I urged a positive attitude about a person's possibilities. Here, I'm advocating reinforcing specific behavior. It's the difference between saying, "I'm expecting great things from you," and saying, "You've done a terrific job straightening out this department." If there is a complaint employees most often express, it is this: "I never get any feedback from the boss, except when something goes wrong. And the teenagers who sit in my office tell me again and again, my dad gets all over my case when I mess up at school, but when I bring home a good grade, he acts if that's nothing, that I'm finally doing what I should have been doing all along." In The 1-Minute Manager, Blanchard and Johnson suggest taking frequent breaks from what they describe as 1-minute praises. Catch your subordinate doing something right, they advise, then give an immediate compliment. Such straightforward acts seem easy enough, and we all know that they're an effective way of reinforcing good work in our children and employees. Yet stop and think, how has it been since you took a full 60 seconds to talk to your son or daughter about some fine thing they just got done, or your secretary or the managers who work under you? What we are discussing here is a very basic courtesy that should apply in all human relations, taking the time to thank people who help us. My friend Mike Somdahl is a specialist at this. One reason he is so successful in business is that he has mastered the fine art of making people feel good by thanking them regularly. Often he will call customers simply to thank them again for the order they placed last week, or for the recommendation they made to another customer, or for the lunch. And before the conversation is over, Mike has often secured another order. Of course, if he called simply with ulterior motives, his clients would recognize that manipulation and resist. But Mike has made gratitude a lifelong habit, and those of us who do business with him appreciate that quality, and we respond. Teachers are often in the habit of calling parents when a student is not performing well, but they might be wise to spend a portion of that time calling parents of kids who are excelling or have improved markedly. Such obvious respect for students gets around the school and can do a great deal to influence the climate of the classroom. Nearly every one of us is starving to be appreciated, and when someone comes along and genuinely thanks us, we will follow that person a very long way. The applause of a single human being, said Samuel Johnson, is of great consequence. The need to be a winner. The old adage has it that nothing succeeds like success, and Peter and Waterman, in their study of the best-run companies in America, found that good organizations capitalize on that truth. They believe that if employees feel that if they are doing well, they will be highly motivated. So the good companies design systems that continually reinforce the notion that their people are winners, while the not-so-excellent companies manage to keep many of their employees constantly scrambling to stay alive. IBM, for instance, sets quotas in order to make sure that 70 to 80% of its salespeople meet their goals each year, whereas another company, an IBM competitor in part of the product line, quotas are structured in such a way that only 40% of the sales force makes them. The systems in the excellent companies, says Peters and Waterman, are not only designed to produce lots of winners, they are constructed to celebrate the winning once it occurs. The art of the compliment. There are right ways and wrong ways of expressing appreciation and reinforcing positive behavior. Here are some suggestions for praising the people under you. 1. Hand out commendations in public. One-to-one praisings are not nearly as effective as public kudos. I shall never forget a Monday afternoon during my sophomore year in high school. I knew I had played better than usual in the previous Friday's football game, and when we assembled for practice, I wondered if the coach had noticed my good blocks. Not only had he noticed, he proceeded to tell the whole squad. It was not brilliant praise, for I was not a brilliant player, yet I remember 35 years later my deep pride as he chewed out certain members of the team for poor performances and said, "Now McGinnis is another story. He's not the most coordinated player we've got, but he was really putting out on Friday." I recall the words verbatim because I desperately needed to be accepted in that group, and when the coach praised me before the team, I finally felt that I was somebody in their eyes. Parental praisings at dinner will go further than individual commendations, for you have made your child feel good before an audience, and when you have meetings with your employees, use that as an opportunity to dispense your thanks. We all fiend modesty and are reluctant to boast about ourselves, but I've never known people who did not like having others boast about them. To be present when your boss is telling you about your success to someone on the telephone, for instance, or to be at a party when your wife is describing the intelligent way you handled a problem with the children yesterday, those are heady pleasures. 2. Use every success as an excuse for celebration. My wife is an expert at praise, and when anything out of the ordinary has happened, a book goes into another printing, or I complete a piece of furniture in the garage, she makes a very big thing of it. She greets me at the door with a special hug and perhaps with tears in her eyes. She stands with me and talks about how happy she is. Then she fixes us all a special dinner. The best families frequently celebrate each other's achievements. Life is sometimes dreary for the people around us, and we can make their existence more pleasurable as well as increase their production if we seize every opportunity for celebration. 3. Employ some gesture to give weight to your commendation. One of the best investments an employer can make is to buy gifts for staff. When gift giving becomes ritualized, as at Christmas, it never means as much when some project is completed and you take the group to lunch and hand out tokens of your appreciation or have secretly had plagues made for their office walls. Thomas Watson Sr., IBM, is said to have made a practice of writing out a check on the spot for achievements he observed in his own prophetic management role. When Peters and Waterman were doing the research for their book on excellence in business, they found many such examples of on-the-spot bonuses. At Foxborough Corporation, a technical advance was desperately needed for survival in the company's early days. Late one evening, a scientist rushed into the president's office with a working prototype. Dumbfounded at the elegance of the solution and bemused about how to reward it, the president bent forward in his chair. Here! In his hand was a banana, the only reward he could immediately put his hands on. From that point on, the small gold banana pin has been the highest anecdotal for scientific achievement at Foxborough. 4. Put your compliment in writing. There is almost magical power in a note, especially a handwritten letter. When you are important to a person and you take time to send a letter of commendation, that gesture can have rich rewards. Sometimes you can double that effect of the gesture by writing, not to the person, but to someone else. I have a friend who travels a great deal, and when an airline employee does him a favor, he not only thanks the person face to face, but also asks the same for his employee's supervisor and drops a note to that supervisor when he returns home. You can be sure that carries more weight than any expression of thanks to the employees. 5. Be very specific in your praise. Vague slaps on the back, like telling people that they're doing a good job, do not have nearly the impact of detailed commendation. I like the way you use the colors for the tree in your picture. Registers with a 5-year-old more than your saying, "That's a pretty picture." It shows that you have looked at it with care. Moreover, you are reinforcing specific behavior. Let's say that your staff successfully pulled a large contract. They may not be aware of the exact reasons they succeeded this time and failed the other time, so it is important for you to point out exactly what you liked about their presentation and to show that you noticed how they worked overtime on a crucial weekend to sharpen the proposal. Karen Pryor tells about her friend Annette, who is good at comforting and offers sympathy and advice when you're in trouble. But it is in an area of good news that Annette offers unusual reinforcement, says Pryor. Tell her the bank approved your loan, and she does more than say, "That's great." She points out exactly what you did to earn and deserve the good news. You see, Annette might respond, "Remember all the trouble you went through with the phone company and getting an air travel card? Now it pays off for you. You're recognized as a good businesswoman, but you had to make the right moves first, and you did. I'm really proud of you." That, says Pryor, is more than approval. That is reinforcement. Beyond stick and carrot. More and more leaders are discovering that they cannot depend solely upon reward and punishment, and that they must turn to other psychological tools for inspiring top performance. In fact, according to many studies, the carrot has very limited effectiveness, and too much reward weakens motivation. As one major league outfielder said, "I used to like playing baseball until I started getting paid for it." If people find internal reward in a task, that is, they enjoy doing it for the pleasure of the act, too much external reward, such as pay incentives for employees or candy bars for students, will weaken the internal motivation. Raymond J. Wildakowski of the University of Wisconsin warns against the dangers of diminishing the task by building in too many such carrots. There is danger, he says, of turning students into reinforcement junkies who must always have something extra in order to learn. On the other hand, verbal commendation, serving notice to your students or employees that you see their work and care about its quality, has a much more powerful effect. When you praise good quality, you ensure the repetition of such effort. I've spent some time studying the techniques employed by marketing companies started less than 30 years ago and still owned by its two founders, Jay Van Andel and Rich DeVos. Last year, the company grossed over $1 billion. How has such an organization flourished so phenomenally in such a short amount of time? There are obviously many secrets, but one of their most practiced principles, and one I see largely neglected in many less successful companies, is that they go to great lengths to celebrate the achievements of their dealers. One can scarcely do anything halfway right around the company without having it noticed and applauded. For instance, at the family reunions, weekend affairs held in large hotel ballrooms, 1,000 dealers will gather for pep talks, seminars, and lectures. But the most important thing going on in these gatherings is the lengthy recognition ceremonies. Many gifts are handed out, and the crowd gets to its feet and cheers literally dozens of times as people are brought across the stage and their achievements are announced. They are among the most clapping audiences I've ever addressed, and they seem to think it important to spend time applauding each other. The owners consider it important to be present at such meetings often, and Rich DeVos says, I have one of the finest jobs in the world because I get to spend half my time traveling around the country honoring other people. Shaping. It is possible, of course, to overdo praise until it becomes meaningless. This is as bad as giving too many criticisms and reprimands. Let's say that you are teaching a horse to kneel on one knee. At first, during the training process, you feed the animal each time any part of the routine is done correctly. But once the habit has been established, the reward should become intermediate. Parents and executives need to remember that principle of shaping. Once good habits are established, it is harmful to praise a person every time. Another caveat is in order at this point. At times we can do harm by praising only the end result of some activity rather than the activity itself. It is possible, for example, to erode a person's love for something, such as learning, by handing out too much reward at the end. We can avoid this pitfall first by using intermediate reinforcement, and second by praising people for the process as well as the product. I admire the way you try so hard. Can be worth gold to someone bogged down and unsure of success. Finally, we must be certain, especially with children, that they feel loved for being as well as for doing. A man sat in the office sobbing uncontrollably about his marriage, which had ended primarily because he was a workaholic. He had come to me because he wanted to rid himself of this obsession with work. But I don't want to get into my childhood, he said. I can't stand these people who go to some head shrinker and come out blaming everything on their parents. I agreed there would be no benefit in blaming them, but explained that in therapy we sometimes need to probe into our childhood in order to gain some insights as to how we arrived at our present habits. The purpose is not to blame anyone, but to find out how we got where we are so we can take some corrective steps to change. He most visibly sighed at that and then launched into a description of his parents, who were very severe and for whom work was the highest good. My folks never hugged us, he said, and they thought you spoil kids by bragging on them, so my sister and I didn't get any strokes, except when we worked hard. If I mowed the lawn especially well on Saturdays, I knew that either Mom would say to Dad or he would say to her, "Didn't Harv do a great job on the lawn today?" I guess kids will do anything to get strokes if they're as hungry for them as I. So I'd go over and over the grass every Saturday, and I worked in a neighborhood store all the years I was in high school. Then when I got married, I assumed that this new woman in my life would love me for working hard just like the other important woman I had. But that's where I was wrong. She would have much rather had me home watching TV with her in the evenings, but somehow I could never believe that. That is a tragic story, and we can prevent such misconceptions in our children if we always give some affection and praise quite apart from actions. They need to know that they are valued for themselves, not merely for the degree to which they meet our expectations or follow our rules. Observing improvement. The alert leader will always be on the lookout for signs of positive change. There is nothing more demoralizing than to change at a great expense than to have our superiors allow that change to go unnoticed. Too frequently, they assume that we have had the same bad habits or attitudes that we've had for the last month, when in fact we may be quite different. A.W. Bevan tells of a heartbreaking incident. A little girl had been misbehaving, and her mother had to rebuke her often. But one day the little girl had tried especially hard and hadn't done a single thing that called for reprimand. That night, after the mother had tucked her into bed and started down the stairs, she heard her daughter sobbing. Turning back, she found her head buried in the pillow. Between sobs, her daughter asked, "Haven't I been a pretty good girl today?" That question, said the mother, went through me like a knife. I had been quick enough to correct her when she did wrong, but when she had tried to behave, I had not noticed it. I put her to bed without one word of appreciation. Focusing on success. The best motivators know that one reason to recognize achievement is to help people concentrate on images of themselves succeeding, and that such mental exercises have an undeniable effect on performance. Arthur Gordon told of hunting on a mild December afternoon in the Georgia Low Country. A single-barreled 20-gauge shotgun given to me for Christmas had made me the proudest 13-year-old in Georgia. On my first hunt, moreover by a lucky freak, I had managed to hit the only bird I got a shot at. My heart almost burst with excitement and pride. The second hunt was a different story. My companion was an elderly judge, a friend of my father's. He looked rather like a bloodhound, with a seamed brow face and hooded eyes, and had the easy tolerance that comes from knowing the worst about the human race, but liking people just the same. I had some misgivings about hunting with the judge because I stood in awe of him and wanted mightily to please him, and I walked straight into humiliation. We found plenty of birds, and the judge knocked down one or two on every convey rise. I, on the other hand, didn't touch a feather. I tried everything, shooting over, under, soon, late. Nothing made any difference, and the more I missed, the tenser I got. Then old Doc, the pointer, spotted a quail in a clump of palmetto. He froze, his long tail rigid. Something in me froze too, because I knew I was facing one more disgrace. This time, however, instead of motioning me forward, the judge placed his gun carefully on the ground. "Let's set a minute," he suggested. Then, slowly, he said, "Your dad was telling me that you hit the first quail you shot at the other day. That right?" "Yes, sir," I said miserably. "Just luck, I guess." "Maybe," said the judge, "but that doesn't matter. Do you remember exactly how it happened? Can you close your eyes and see it all in your mind?" I nodded, because it was true. I could summon up every detail. The bird exploding from under my feet, the gun seemingly to point itself, the surge of elation, the warmth of the praise. "Well now," the judge said easily, "you just sit there and relive that shot a couple more times. Then go over there and kick up that bird. Don't think about me or the dog or anything else. Just think about that one good shot you made the other day, and sort of keep out of your own way." When I did what he said, it was as if a completely new set of reflexes had come into play. Out flashed the quail. Up went the gun, smoothly and surely, as if it had life and purpose of its own. Seconds later, Doc was at my knee offering the bird. I was all for pressing on, but the judge unloaded his gun. "That's all for today, son," he said. "You've been focusing on failure all afternoon. I want to leave you looking on an image of success." "There," said Gordon. Complete in 2 sentences was the best advice I ever had, or ever would have. What the judge did for Gordon is similar to what we often try to do for our patients in psychotherapy. They come to our offices wounded from some recent failure, with their self-esteem at a low ebb. They feel as if they can do nothing right, and indeed with such a negative self-concept, they tend to fulfill the self-prophecies. So to reverse that trend, we ask them to reach back and relive some successes. If they are quite depressed, it sometimes takes some prodding for them to picture any time when they functioned well. But as they begin to talk and replay the mental tapes of themselves at their best, it is surprising how they are visibly picked up. They have often become so obsessed with recent failures that they have forgotten the good years. Can we give too much self-confidence? Mr. Dave Grant, who teaches courses on maximum performance to many supervisors in business, says that managers often come up after the seminar and say, we don't want to make our employees feel too good about themselves, or they'll think they should have more pay or a bigger job. Sometimes they need to be taken down a peg or two, and it doesn't hurt to arrange for them to fail once in a while. It is a pathetic way to run an organization, as if employees were like infants in danger of being spoiled. The best leaders take the opposite approach. They do everything possible to help their people succeed and gain more confidence in what they are doing. W. Somerset Maugham said, "The common idea that success spoils people by making them vain, egotistic, and self-complacent is erroneous. On the contrary, it makes them for the most part humble, tolerant, and firm. Failure makes people bitter and cruel." Our task then is to help people parlay their small accomplishments into even larger ones. And one way to assist that is to follow rule number 7, recognize and applaud achievement.